Podcast is about why the Soviet Union and the USA became rivals between 1945 to 1950. When looking at the reasons, there are many sort of. In this video, I will discuss these reasons, but it can be stated that the USA and the USSR misunderstood each other's actions. This led to an increase in tension between the two countries and eventually the Cold War. The first thing to look at is both these countries believed in total opposite ways of thinking. America believed in a system of democracy and free societies which included self-determination and free trade. The Soviet Union followed a system of dictatorship and sought national security by territorial expansion and spheres of influence. These different systems of ruling is the first thing that put the USA and USSR apart. During the Second World War, the USA did not send troops to help the Russians against the Germans on the Russian front. When the war ended in 1945, the USA and USSR emerged as the main two superpowers in the world. The first reason one could state why the Soviet Union and USSR became rivals was because of misunderstandings. When Stalin's troops liberated German-occupied countries, Stalin said that these countries were liberated would be under communist influence, thus to create a buffer zone between Germany and Russia. However, the US President Roosevelt saw it as a communist takeover of these countries. Another reason why the two wartime allies became rivals during this time period is because of the development of the nuclear bomb. This technically set off an arms race between USA and Russia. In 1942, the USA had started work on a nuclear project, and on 16 July, the weapon was tested in New Mexico. This project was done in collaboration with the British. However, they were treated as a junior partner, whereas Stalin was not at all informed of this development at this time. This led to mistrust between the USA and USSR. However, due to spies, the USSR was also able to learn of this destructive force. The new American president, Harry S. Truman, tested the atomic bomb on Japan. The USSR was never informed of these developments until the bomb was dropped, and France was anyway occupied by the Germans at this time. Eventually, on August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union tested their own atom bomb, which sets off the arms race between these two superpowers. The year 1946 saw further misunderstandings between the Soviet Union and the USA. The US presented a plan to the UN where an international agency would supervise the mining of uranium and manufacture of plutonium, the key ingredients for a nuclear explosion, and the Russians reject this plan. Later that year, when the USA carried out a series of nuclear tests, Stalin says this was proof of America trying to gain international control. In 1945, Stalin sends troops into Iran to set up a communist government. This was after the agreement with the British that the Soviet Union would occupy Iran. The Soviets are threatened by the US and Great Britain and eventually withdraw the troops. However, this puts a dent in Soviet-US relationships. The Soviet Union keeps taking over various countries by removing the Germans from them. Eventually, when Greece and Turkey fall under communist regime, President Truman asked Congress on March 12, 1947 to authorize economic and military aid to these two countries. President Truman stated that people would have to choose between alternatives of communist tyranny and democratic freedom. This becomes known as the Truman Doctrine. In 1947, America comes up with the Marshall Plan. This plan was launched by the US to revive the economic aid for the reconstruction of Europe. One can say that this was a generous move by the US. However, the Soviet Union saw it as a move to make European countries dependent on the US because it allowed America to influence the spread into Europe and make countries not accept the Soviet system. The next event that brought USSR and USA apart was the Berlin blockade. Germany had been divided into 4 zones: British, French, American, and Russian. Eventually, America, Britain, and France combined their zone to form West Germany, thus creating a West and East Germany. Due to the fact that Berlin was deep in the Soviet zone, Berlin itself was divided into 4 zones, thus a West and East Berlin. On July 23, 1948, Stalin blocked supplies to the city of Berlin. US responded by sending in supplies by air. This carried on for 1 year. Eventually, the Soviet Union gave up the blockade and reopened communication. The Berlin blockade further brings the Soviet Union and USA apart. When the Second World War ended, all the countries which were liberated by the Soviet Union were controlled by communism. Eventually, in 1949, the USA, Canada, and 10 other Western European countries set up the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is known as NATO. The NATO stated that any attack on the following NATO country would be considered an attack against all NATO members. If an attack is to occur, then it is the right of other members to assist the country being attacked. And assisting the country may carry out actions which they feel necessary in order to help. This includes the use of armed forces. Armed forces will be used to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. The USA had even used the atom bomb on Japan without telling its Russian ally. Eventually, Russia comes up with its own atom bomb, which leads to the arms race. This eventually leads to the USA coming up with a hydrogen bomb, which is a bomb more destructive than the atom bomb. This sets up an arms race between the two superpowers. Thus, to conclude, these are the reasons why the USA and USSR become rivals between this period of 1945 to 1950.